Welcome back, everybody. Good evening. It is CALLOUS Draft Duel Quarterfinals. Another draft has just recently completed, and I am here to give you my thoughts and show you how it went. This might be my favorite pairing of the round, personally. AustrianGeorge and Freeday. A lot of respect for both these guys. Think they are both under the radar, underappreciated, and probably two of the stronger players left. But there's a lot of strong players left. Anyone who's gotten to this point has already won 2 drafts. If you win here and make it to the semifinals, you've won 3 drafts. And getting down to the nitty-gritty, getting down to the wire of this tour where it's only people who really know what they're doing, plus Darth Tyros. So, George on the left, player 1, Freeday on the right, player 2. Let's get straight into the action, and the first ban is going to be Salamence. As I've been discussing throughout the recent videos, I think the metagame has absolutely started to shift as the tournament has progressed. At first, people were more concerned about banning Skarm and Bliss and Walls and what have you, but now bans closer to the lines of Salamence, Metagross, Gengar, what have you. Just proactive threats have been more the new thought process as far as bans are concerned. And as I say that, Blissey is the next ban, so he's going to take it a totally different way, wants to remove that poke from the pool. Fair enough. The next ban from George, Raikou. And the counter ban is going to be Gengar from Freeday. So that's going to leave Skarmory, which has been the most common first pick in the rare times. I guess less rare these days that it is available. Like I said, it was like perma-banned in round 1 and basically for round 2 as well. But in this round, as the tournament is progressing, it's starting to sneak through. These guys, who I guess are better at the format and more familiar with the format, are not convinced that it's broken. So that is on the table here. That is an option, but so is, Snorlax, Metagross, Cheetar, Zapdos, Arrow, all sorts of things that people have been taking very early on. But George is not going to deviate. He is just going to go with Skarmory. And time will tell whether that is right or wrong. It's going to be a pretty powerful package back for Freeday. Is Skarmory better than whatever busted combo Freeday is about to grab? Time will tell. I'm not sure. There are a bunch of spitters in this format, but there are also a bunch of ghosts in the format. But then there's a bunch of pursuit users in the format. It's kind of a vicious cycle. Everything is relative. Even janky spinners are good spinners as far as getting rid of spikes is concerned. But like I said, there's the ghost factor. There's the pursuit factor. I'm not 100% sold that Skarm is truly busted. It's obviously a good mon, but in draft in general, in this format, and certainly in Emerald Open, but in draft in general, more so than in OU, having just random special attackers more so than physical attackers, and likewise having mixed attackers, it's more common in draft than it is in OU. So I think that hurts Skarm a bit. I think you're very often going to roll up against random, Entei and Sceptiles and Arcanines and Ampharos and all these kind of things that you don't really see in OU, but they can all threaten the Skarmory. So I think that there are just so many special attackers and that every opponent is going to have a bazillion of them makes Skarm a little bit worse. Like I said, I'm not convinced that it's broken, but it's obviously good, and George, given pretty powerful options here, thinks that it's better than anything else he could take. So we'll see if the results prove him right. But it is hard to deny that this is a very powerful opening round for Freeday. Metagross Cheetar, I don't know, man. This is where I get stuck. I mean, I like Skarm and all, but is it better than Meta-Tar? We're so early in the draft that I don't want to spend too much time getting stuck on this, but like, if you're asking me, would I rather have just Skarmory or would I rather have Meta and Tar? I think I'd rather have the Meta-Tar, personally. I'm just not convinced that Skarm is on the same level as these mons. I don't even know that on a 1-for-1 that it's better. Never mind 2-for-1. I'm just not sure, but if George goes on to dominate a game and basically just win because of Skarm, then that's that. Then I'll shut up and be wrong, and we will move along. George is going to follow up now with Zapdos Snorlax. Zapdos, generically good, has been first picked quite a bit. Totally fine to grab it here in the second round. Just a good mon that you can't go too far wrong with. The Lax is interesting. I don't think it's good into meta tower, but at the same time, are you really going to pass it back? There's a world where I could see taking like Zapdos Celebi, which gives you a little padding if your opponent were to take Lax. I can also see like Zapdos Arrow here as a possibility. Not that Arrow is necessarily amazing against meta tower, but it's not terrible either. I think as the tournament has gone down, I've gotten lower and lower on Lax. It's still good. It's never going to not be good, but it's been perceived as like a, sometimes even a first pick, but a really, really high top 5, top 6 pick, basically all tournament long, and I don't know that I necessarily feel that way. I think I might be a little bit lower on it at this time than other people are. I think there's just so many counters between fighters, ghosts, wheezing, whatever, and many, many normal resists that are often picked in this, even janky ones. I'm just not quite sold on Lax just yet, and certainly even less enthused about it into Metatar. So right now, I would rather be Freeday, and he's going to get 2 picks here, and they're pretty damn good picks. The Celebi is almost certainly just a direct response to the Lax, and it happens to be pretty good against Zapdos as well. And then Aerodactyl, not only can you not go too far on, but you've got Arrow Tower already, which is pretty difficult for some teams to deal with. You can really just overwhelm and win with the rock spam. So very, very early on in the draft, obviously a million things can happen and a million things can change, but to me, right now, I would rather be Freeday. I definitely like these 4 better than these 3. That's where I would rather be, personally. Now check these picks out. This is interesting stuff. So, Swampert, totally understandable. There's Meta, Tar, Arrow on the other side. I'm down. I think Swampert's a good pick. In fact, I think if he didn't do that, it is very possible that Freeday would have grabbed that to deny it from George. So, that's a heads-up pick, I think. I think Swampert here is really important. But how about this pick? Gonna go for Dugtrio. I'm not gonna bore you. You guys already know I don't think Dugtrio is that good, but if there's ever a scenario for it, this might be it. You've got the Zapdug combo, you've got the Skarmdug combo, which is a common defensive core, and then Dugtrio is now being picked into an opponent who has Meta, T-Tar, Celebi. Certainly, against those mons, it's going to be better than it would be normally. So as much as I'm not in love with Dugtrio in this format, this is one of those exceptions in my mind where this pick might be appropriate and might be good. And I think if he didn't do it, I don't think Freeday was going to take it necessarily, but I do see it as a possibility that Freeday might have banned it out. So I really am in this context, this very specific circumstance that we're in right now. I am truly okay with the Dugtrio pick. I think both of these picks are very reactionary to what Freeday is doing, and I think they're very heads up by George. So I'm absolutely on board with this line, and we will see how Freeday wants to respond. He made these exact picks in the first round as well. He likes taking Starmie and Milo off the table at the same time. Can't blame him for that. 2 generic good mons. Starmie good into the Skarm, maybe not into the Lax or the Zapdos, but like it's just good in general, and you want spinners that don't blow against the Skarmory Drafter. And then Milo, again, general good mon, good against Swampert. Again, maybe not great into Lax Zapdos, but just general good mon, probably the best bulky water available with Swampert off the table, and it might be better than Swampert to begin with. Totally fine with these picks. Hard to argue with anything, in my opinion, that Freeday has done so far. And now George gets to close out the round, and we go over to bans. And again, both of these picks really make sense to me. So even though in the opening skirmish, the first 3, say, of George versus the first 4 of Freeday, I liked Freeday's position better, I think George has immediately transitioned into being very reactionary to what Freeday is doing. And I think these picks make sense and demonstrate an understanding of the format. We've got Jolteon into a dude who not only just took double water, but there's also an Aerodactyl on the other side. I think that pick makes a ton of sense. You're also protecting your Skarm, certainly a mon that you don't want to play against. And then he's also going to go Hariyama. Totally on board with that. Rock resists are going to be very, very necessary. He's going to want to load up on those. And fighters, specifically bulky leaning fighters, are very much where you want to be against Tyranitar, so that pick makes a lot of sense as well. I also think Hari's pretty reasonable against Milo. And Hari's one of those Mons, not quite as good as Zapdos, but very flexible. You can just put it on any team, whether you go with an offensive set or a defensive set or somewhere in between. It's a pretty malleable poke that can do whatever you need it to do. And yeah, I think that Hariyama is good in this format and good into what Freeday has so far. So again, I think these picks make a lot of sense, specifically in the context of what Freeday has already taken. So I think George finished out this round pretty strong, and again, clearly demonstrating an understanding of the format. Great opening round for both players, truly. Can't wait to see how this one proceeds. Freeday is wasting no time wanting to remove anything that might counter his Tyranitar and his Arrow, and he's going to take Donphan out of play, which is a very early Donphan ban by most measures, but when you've got Tar Arrow, that's the kind of pick that you make. We saw another player in an earlier draft do this same thing. I believe it was Zakaru. He banned Donphan and Flygon in one go because he too had Tar and Arrow, and the same logic is applicable here. So again, this is a ban that normally would be a little eye-popping. Donphan in the second round of bans, I don't know about that. But again, it is all nuance. It is all context in this draft. When he's got T-Tar Arrow and when it's not going to be that good into his opponent who's got like double electric and who's got Scarm and what have you, then yeah, I think that taking Donphan out makes plenty of sense. George also has a plan here. He's going to take Fori out of the play, and that might be because he's afraid of Freeday picking it. Remember that Freeday is going to have the double pick after we get through these bans, so I think that this ban might be out of fear that his opponent actually grabs it rather than trying to specifically counter him per se. He's also protecting his Scarm to an extent. He wants to get good spinners out of there. Claydol's still floating around, and there's a million not amazing spinners in this, but if you just want something that spins, they're out there. But I think it's double duty. I think he just doesn't want Freeday to take it as a spiker or as a spinner, and he's the Scarm drafter. It's also a little bit annoying for Lax. I'm okay with the Fori ban. Makes plenty of sense to me, and I think Fori in general is better in this format than it is in OU. On the other side, Freeday, I don't think this is necessarily a specific pick, just taking a generically powerful Mon, arguably one of the best Mons remaining out of the pool, by removing Gyarados. That makes sense to me, especially when the Zapdos counter and the Skarmory counter are both on the other side. So some of the things that are better against the Gyarados are already unavailable to you. Maybe you don't want to play against that, kind of a scary Mon. DD2 attacks T-Wave, for example, is a set that could be really obnoxious for the things that Freeday already has. I wouldn't want to play against Gyara either if I had Freeday's squad. Again, a logical ban that I can get behind. And this one I think might be just based on how broken it was in the Funk and Zakaru set, but we've got some early Blaziken love here. Like, yes, you have Skarmory Lax, but like, I don't think Blaziken is necessarily amazing against George. I don't think it's great against Zapdos or Jolteon or Dugtrio or even Swampert, really, unless you specifically have HP Grass. It's totally a thing that the reversal set is just terrifying and you don't want to deal with that. But, I mean, there's other good things that use reversal, like Heracross or Medicham, what have you. It doesn't specifically have to be Blaziken. But like I said, I think this might be as simple as seeing that one set between George and Funk and crapping your pants at how powerful Blaziken potentially can be and not wanting to be on the bad end of what happened to Zakaru in that particular game. So, round 2 of bans done. Freeday with the double pick. He's going to immediately go Claydol. The Claydol in particular stands out to me. This is a pick that I think would be totally wrong if he doesn't make it. I think you've got to grab it here. And you could argue that over Blaziken, George maybe should have banned the doll. But the doll is a huge pickup into the double electric drafter, and you're protecting your Arrow and your T-Tar by taking out a good rock resist. So I think the Claydol is like a mandatory pick there. Like I said, George maybe should have gotten rid of it over the Blaziken, but it would be absolutely wrong, in my opinion, for Freeday to not grab it here. So I think that's a good pull. The Heracross I am not as excited about. Good Mon in the format for sure, but very Heracross unfriendly draft on the other side. Skarm very good against it. Zapdos good against it. Dugtrio obviously good against it. Again, there's always the possibility, and we know that Heracross is not going to be paired with Sand unless Freeday specifically wants it to be, but they'll probably be on separate teams. But the reversal set is always terrifying. It will beat any of the things that I just talked about. It'll beat Dugtrio, it'll beat Jolteon, what have you. But that's something that I think George can reasonably plan for. Load up on Roars, load up on whatever you need to do to counter it. I don't think Heracross is that great into George's draft. Now, it is totally possible that this is kind of a two-way, somewhat defensive-minded pick. The Heracross, I think, is good into Freeday for sure. A threat to Tar, to Celebi, to Starmie. Good against Milo, good against Doll. So the logic might be that Freeday doesn't want George to take it. And if that's what he's thinking, fine. But I don't think the Heracross is all that great into the things that George has at this time. So on the other side, George opening up his round 2. Going to take Registeel. That pick is good. And Alakazam. The Registeel in particular, it's going to be a fight back and forth for the rest of the draft, getting those good rock resists. They both want them for different reasons, but it's more important, I think, for George to grab them when he's the one who has to play against the Cheetar and the Aerodactyl, and you're going to quickly run out of premium options. Steelix and Flygon are still in the pool, and I think those are definitely Mons worth a look. But for now, Registeel, good option. Rock Resist, Special Wall. He needs both of those at this time, so that's a good pickup. The Alakazam, I'm a little bit surprised by. It might be that he's denying Special Walls a little bit. Registeel lacks both on his side. Zapdos can be a Special Wall. Blissey got banned out. The Special Walls for Freeday, basically, unless you view Celebi as such, there really isn't one right now. So this pick for George might be that he sees that his opponent, as it stands, is a little bit special vulnerable, and he wants to take advantage of that. But I don't know, Zam this early, you could be met with like Houndoom, Umbreon on the other side. Cheetar, if it needs to, can go Pursuit and deal with the Zam. There are still Special Walls available for Freeday, like if he wants to take like Regice or something here. So this is probably the first pick of the draft that I'm not all that enthused about. I like Alakazam fine, but it doesn't blow me away into the things that Freeday currently has. And I also think if Freeday does feel worried about it, like I said, he does have pretty good counters that are still available. So I could take or leave the Zam. It's good, it's fast, it hits hard, but I feel like there are better things that he could have taken here. I think I would have taken like another Rock Resist. I think like Flygon would make sense for me. Maybe Steelix, but yeah, not thrilled about the Alakazam. Do like the Registeel. See how Freeday wants to respond. He's not going to be concerned about those Mons that I mentioned. He's going to go a totally different way. He's going to go for Charizard and Dragonite here. I think that with the Milotic on your side, it's a lot easier to take Pokemon like this that are mixed breakers that something like a Milo or a Starmie, frankly, would counter pretty well. But the fact that he made that double water pick, the Starmie Milo, is going to enable these kind of picks. I think that they're pretty good. I think that mixed breakers are pretty good against what George is showing right now. I think like Lax Skarm, for example, very vulnerable to one side or the other, whether it's Focus Punch, Fire Blast, whatever. Mixed breakers really hammer that home. Same deal. I could see Dragonite having the ability to threaten all of Skarm, Zapdos, Hariyama, for example, if you tried to have a defensive core along those lines. I think that these picks make plenty of sense, and it looks like Freeday is leaning aggressive or mid-rangey, and these fit in just fine. So personally, I like this round of picks better than the ones that George just made. It's also potentially a first or second Heal Beller, depending on if Celebi or Knight, or neither, wants to pick it up. But I think Freeday right now is reasonable against status between the two Natural Cure Mons and the two Heal Bell users. Whereas maybe George at this time could probably use some amount of help in the status protection department. But he's going to respond like this. He's going to go with Moltres and Medicham. So we'll address the Medicham first. I think that even though there are some things on the other side for Freeday that are good against fighters, fighters are still a good bet and largely where you want to be when you're staring down a Cheetar on the other side. Metacham also can hurt some of the things that other fighters can't. Like, for example, it can meaningfully actually hurt Starmie. Other fighters not so hot into it. There are a number of things that deal with fighters pretty well. Aerodactyl, obviously, outspeed, can one-hit KO Metacham. Zard, Dragonite, Claydol, all fighting resist, though again, Claydol has to worry about being outsped and getting hit with Shadow Ball. Metacham does not blow me away into Freeday, but fighters in general, when there's T-Tower on the other side, are a pretty good pick. The Moltres is interesting. I wonder if it's more about not wanting Freeday to take it. The Moltres does not blow me away into Starmie and Milo in particular on the other side, but like also Arrow, also Charizard, also Dragonite. I think the Moltres is not amazing into Freeday's draft. It's a generally threatening mon, a general good mon, so I don't hate it. And again, if it's partially because you don't want to play against it, I'm okay with that too. But I'm not in love with the Moltres pick as a proactive pick against Freeday. If he's got it in a defensive mindset of this is something I don't want my opponent to take, fine. But the Moltres right now does not blow me away. On the other side, getting involved a little further in the Spikes War, we're going to see Glalie and Machamp coming down from Freeday. So Glalie, as we just discussed, is a spiker. It is the first spiker for Freeday. Before he got banned, it's interesting that he's going to value Glalie higher than Cloyster, which, as I've said in previous videos, is something that I agree with, but I don't know that everybody's going to be able to get on board with Glalie in this format being better than Cloyster, but that is something that I would agree with personally. So the current count, as it stands, George just has the one spiker, but has not bothered picking up a spinner, whereas Freeday is going to have two spinners and now his own spiker as well. So Freeday a little bit ahead in the spikes department. Glalie doesn't do a whole heck of a lot other than get spikes going, but it is randomly good against a couple of these things. It has a favorable matchup in the lead position against Zapdos, for example. It's not the easiest thing to revenge kill with Dugtrio, whereas Dugtrio will get one-hit KO'd by Stab Ice Beam. It's got a little bit of defensive utility, but by and large, reliable spiker is what Glalie does, and that's why it was taken. The Machamp is fine. I don't mind taking fighters here. Every fighter you take is always going to be good against Lax and Registeel, and it's also always going to be a protection pick with your own Cheetar. So I never mind taking fighters from Freeday's seat, and Stab Focus Sponge from any fighter is going to be a threat to Skarm, even though Skarm on paper should be reasonable against fighters. And also, basically every fighter learns Rock Slide, so these are also decent picks against the Moltres. Totally on board with Freeday's picks here, as I have been throughout the draft. I really like basically everything that Freeday's done. I think he's one of the absolute strongest, if not the strongest drafter in the tournament. And he's got to be, in my mind, one of the favorites to win the whole damn thing. But let's not get too far ahead. We're only in the quarterfinals. Let's go ahead and see how George responds. These picks are good, I think. The Vaporeon I'm down with, and the Flygon is one of the mons that I mentioned earlier. Like I said, Flygon Steelix I think would be wonderful picks. Steelix, largely a protection pick, I think, when you've got double electric. You really, as the Zapdos Jolteon drafter, do not want to play against Steelix. So if it somehow does not get picked here by Freeday, I think you should really consider banning it. But we will get to that if and when it comes. Flygon, good for the reasons that we talked about. Having Metatar Arrow alone on the other side is enough reason. Don't need any further reason to take Flygon, but if it happens to be good against anything else, or in the Spikes War, or what have you, then that's a sweet perk. The Vaporeon, again, same concept. Bulky waters, when you have Metatar Arrow on the other side, any good bulky water is a good bulky water, period. So Vaporeon may or may not be the best one left. I would say that it is. It's also good against Zard, and yeah, Pure Waters, I think, probably a decent option against Zard. If you were to take, like, Quagsire, for example, as a rock resist for Tower Arrow, you very much open yourself up to getting blown up by HP Grass. I like the Vaporeon pick. These both make sense to me. And I think he is going to need all the padding he can get against some of the offensive threats that Freeday is currently rolling up with. And Freeday is going to close out this round with Cloyster Dusclops, a further commitment to winning the Spikes War. So he now has 2 spikers, 3 spinners, and a ghost. All the good pursuit users are still available, and there's certainly merit for either player to look into Houndoom or Umbreon. I'd be interested in both of those Pokemon if I were either player, really, but I think they will definitely be contested. Either if they're not banned out, they will definitely be contested in this third round, I would imagine. The Dusclops also functions as a reasonable counter against Alakazam in most cases. Ghosts in general are annoying for Lax because you force it to either run Shadow Ball or be annoyed, have a difficult time with the Ghosts. But all around, before we get into the third round, I feel that Freeday is winning this draft. I feel that he's got the stronger lineup. I feel that he's winning the Spikes War. I feel that his picks have been largely mistake-free. George is also drafting well, but we're looking at an A- or a B+ or whatever from George versus basically an A+ from Freeday. This guy is really hard to beat. He really understands the format, and every pick for me has been, yep, that makes sense, yep, that makes sense, and very difficult to draft against a guy who really doesn't make a whole heck of a lot of mistakes. So we'll see how it goes on. Nothing is ever set in stone in these things, but just giving you a periodic update as I like to do at the end of each round of picks, and right now, in my opinion, Freeday is winning. So we go to the final round of bans. George is going to take out Magneton, which is something that Skarmory drafters have just been doing as in general. It makes sense. You don't want to get hard countered in that way. Basically as simple as that. Magneton's other use is as a Bolt Beam resist. Doesn't seem super applicable against what Freeday has. Doesn't really have any Bolt Beam users other than like Dragonite or maybe Starmie, I guess. But I don't think that is at all a factor into this pick. I think it's as simple as protecting your Skarm. And that's fine. It's totally possible that if you don't do that, that Freeday would take a late Magneton and would try to get that counter going. So, yeah, maybe that is the obligation of the paranoid Skarm drafter. We've seen others do it. It makes sense. I don't object. Freeday is going to take Umbreon out. Not surprised by that. He took the Dusclops. He may be planning on taking another Ghost. I could see why he would want that to not be there. It's interesting that he himself doesn't want to take it against the Alakazam, though Houndoom is still floating. But he also might not have that option because George gets to double pick first in this third round, and he might be worried about George taking that kind of Mon if Freeday does not remove them and make that not possible. This is another specific protection pick. The same way that Magneton was designed to protect his Skarm, P2, I would imagine, is designed to protect his Dugtrio. So he's taking 2 potentially devastating counter picks out of play for Freeday. Totally fine with these picks. Specialized, nuanced, but obviously have a very targeted purpose in this particular instance. And I am not surprised by this ban at all. Freeday is also going to remove Houndoom. After taking Dusclops, not surprised at all that he's going to get rid of the double pursuit user. I wonder now, like I said, if that makes him a little bit more Alakazam vulnerable. That's my one hesitation with doing it this way. I wonder if somewhere in here he could have, if he could, maybe he gives up one of these spikers and he just takes the Houndoom, and then if the spiker gets banned or taken or whatever on the other side, you just suck it up and take a worse spiker. You just take Omastar or Smeargle or whoever. So I guess that's my one really nitpicky potential critique about Freeday's draft. Because like I said, taking out these 2 pursuit users maybe makes Alakazam give you a really hard time. I mean, you do still have Aerodactyl against it. You can make Tower Pursuit if it needs to be, but I can see scenarios potentially when Zam comes in the right matchup where it can actually be really difficult for Freeday now. Alakazam could steal a game for George here, and that could be a big X factor in what is almost certainly going to be a close series, as I would assume that they all are this deep in the tournament. Alright, so let's finish out this draft. Back over to George with the double pick, and he is opting for Arcanine and Scizor. Yeah, I'm not a huge Scizor guy, and it hasn't been picked too much in this. It's gotten picked a handful of times, but if there's a time that you're going to take Scizor, it is probably when your opponent has Cheetar, Celebi, Starmie, Claydol, Glalie, all things that Scizor can hit super effectively and be really annoying against. So, yeah, it's a heads-up pick. One thing that I will absolutely compliment George on, he is not at all just ignoring his opponent and doing what he wants to do the way that Tyros does or the way that Arctic does. He's drafting, and everybody's their own draft style, which is really cool. I love that about the format. You've got the aggro-focused, ignore the opponent Tyros, the stall-focused, ignore the opponent, Spikes demonizing Arctic, and then you have guys like this, who I don't know what the special term is for this, we'll call them counter drafters or good drafters. That's what I'd call them. But the pure way that this format is supposed to be played, at least in my mind when I came up with it, is adjusting your picks based on what your opponent is doing and responding directly to what your opponent has already taken. And George very much falls into that category. So as much as I am not a general Scizor fan, and I think it is not great in most drafts, I think it's quite good and quite threatening in this draft, and I think that is a very heads-up and aware pick. The Arcanine, on the flip side, I could take or leave. It does have some merit against Metagross, against Celebi, against Glalie, what have you. Arcanine actually has a lot of defensive purposes. Intimidate, always a good ability, but it's really good against fire types and certain special attackers in general. Like, Charizard really doesn't have a lot that it can do to Arcanine, for example. And, like, it's not going to be applicable here, but, like, Arcanine is actually pretty reasonable against, like, Gengar, too. Gar can't burn it. If you go full bulk, HP, special defense, load up or whatever, you take Thunderbolts and Ice Punches really, really well, especially Sandless. So Arcanine actually has a decent amount of utility, and it's been picked a good amount in this. I don't know that it blows me away against Freeday's draft, but I do think it's a general good mon. I still wonder about letting the Steelix float in the breeze. I really feel like if he wasn't going to ban that, he should really consider taking it. I mean, even though it's not incredible into Freeday, can't you just try to run the Steelix into the arrow and call it good? I would fear here, the one thing that I don't like about the Arcanine pick, I would fear here, if I'm George, that Freeday, who you got to give credit to, you got to assume he's good enough to identify it and make the pick, might just grab Steelix here, and you kind of regret letting that happen. And that is what's going to happen here. I don't know if he regrets it or not, but Freeday does take Steelix alongside Breloom here. And I got to question, like I said, I got to question that from George's end. Scizor I like, but like maybe it's Scizor Steelix here. Arcanine's fine, but like you got to give up something to not let your opponent take the Steelix. I wouldn't be thrilled if I'm George. Steelix I think is quite good against Zapdos, against Jolteon, and against Snorlax. I think that's going to be an obnoxious poke. Now granted, George does have things that hit it. He does have Dugtrio. He does have a Skarm that walls it all day. He does have two Firemons. He does have Medicham. He does have Flygon. I'm not saying Steelix is the end of the world, but I do think it could be really, really obnoxious for George and counter some of his better Mons. So, can he beat it? Of course he could beat it. It's not like the hard counter that makes it so George can never win. But still, if I were in George's seat, I would not want to play against it. I think it's going to be super duper obnoxious. Probably a mon that I would have made inaccessible to my opponent. Breloom, again, fighters. We know the merit of fighters. You have the T-Tar. Get rid of fighters. Also good against Lax as both a fighter and a Leech Seed user. In general, however, I don't think that fighters are incredible against George's draft. That doesn't mean that Freeday shouldn't be taking them because they have defensive purpose for him, but I don't think fighters are amazing into George's draft. Obviously good against the Lax and the Registeel, but there are a number of fighting resistances for George, not to mention there are things like the neutral things, for example, like Arcanine against fighters. It's fine. Takes fighting hits neutrally. It's bulky. It does intimidate. It can handle fighters just fine. Same thing, Vaporeon, like, yeah, I mean, you could spore it with Breloom specifically, but, like, Vaporeon can handle a Brick Break or a Cross Chop or what have you. Yeah, fighters don't blow me away into George, but at the same time, like I said, because they are pretty good against Freeday when you are the T-Tar drafter, I can see why you would want to take them anyway. So back over to George. Unsung hero, one of the best mons so far in the small sample size of this tournament. It's Jinx. And then my personal favorite mon in all of Pokemans. It is Miltank. So, starting with the Jinx, I don't know that it was like specifically targeted at anything, but I could see a Celebi that it beats. I could see a Milotic that it beats. You can outspeed Heracross, kill it with Psychic. Obviously good against things that are 4x weak to Ice. Outspeed the Champ, get it with Psychic. Good against Cloyster. Good against things that are just really slow, like Dusclops and Steelix. I'm down with the Jinx, and it seems that George has pretty much not bothered with the Spikes War. He took the Skarm in the opening pick and has not touched a Spiker or a Spinner since then. And that seems to be a common theme. One player in the draft, in most drafts, seems to lean really heavily into Spikes, and the other player, rather than trying to contest it, just gives up and just goes really, really aggro. And we don't have a large enough sample size. We don't have enough data right now to know who wins in that scenario, the guy who loads up and has spikes every game, or the guy who just built really, really aggressive teams and just clicks attacks every turn. But I will be curious at the end of this tournament, in that matchup, in that scenario, who comes out on top more often. And then if this format is to continue after this tournament, which I'm not sure, it's up in the air right now, but there's been a pretty high amount of interest, and I think there's a pretty decent chance that we do keep going with this format after this tournament concludes. Then we'll have even more of a sample size, and we'll go from there. Miltank. So Miltank has been used a lot as a fire counter in this format because of Thick Fat. It actually handles Charizard really well, believe it or not. I don't see a lot of other fire or ice users. It can randomly take like ice beams from Glalie and Starmie and Dragonite or whatever, but in the case of D-Knight and Starmie, for example, they can obviously hit the Miltank with things that aren't just ice attacks, so that doesn't blow me away. It is a Heal Bell user, however, which George had 0 of prior to that pick, so certainly if you want to have at least one Bell on the team, then Miltank is a good mon to do it. Of note, Chansey also still hanging out. Surprised that hasn't been grabbed yet. That's been a oft-picked Pokemon in this format, but I don't view it as an obligatory pick. The Miltank is fine. I mean, I'm never going to criticize Miltank. It's my favorite Pokemon, but in the context of this draft, does the Miltank stand out to me as having a ton of merit against Freeday? Not really, when it doesn't counter a lot, and there's 3 fighters on the other side, and doesn't really counter things like T-Tower Arrow, though I guess it can have like counter T-Wave. Meh. Not sure about the Miltank, but he does at least add a good Heal Bell user, so that's got to count for something. But going to Value Town is Freeday. This is never going to happen again for the rest of the tournament. This is about as late as it gets. Regice Regirock mid-round 3. We have seen these mons consistently picked in the first and at most the second round. This is about as late as it ever gets. I already thought Freeday was winning, and this feels like insane value for this late. Certainly think Freeday is more winning as of these picks. On the other side, George, again, with kind of defensive-minded picks, the same way he banned out Magneton and Porygon 2, not because he wanted them, but because he didn't want his opponent to have them. Might be the same deal here with Weezing by protecting his lax, but it's also good against the 3 fighters that Freeday has accumulated here. And in general, I think Weezing is just a good mon in this format, far better in this than it is in OU, so I think taking Weezing this late is very good value for George. I think Weezing, power level wise, is probably closer to a mid-ish round 2 pick, so getting it mid-late in round 3 is good. And then he's going to participate very late in theory. I don't even know if this is even going to end up making a team, but he does grab Omastar, participating a little bit in the Spikes War. He's certainly not bothering spinning, but he does add a potential second Spiker here. The Omastar, again, does not blow me away into this opponent. Celebi can hit the 4x weakness and knock it into next week. Omastar only takes water attacks neutrally, so it actually isn't that great into like Starmie or Milo either. There's a million things on the other side that can learn Earthquake, like Aerodactyl, Titar, Meta, what have you. There's a bunch of fighters on the other side. I think Omastar is going to be very defensively vulnerable in this particular matchup, and I don't know that it's actually going to make a team. I kind of think the Omastar is not going to get played, but in theory, he has added a second spike threat. I don't know that I buy it. Maybe a bluff, maybe a very specific circumstances. He tags it in between games, but I'm skeptical that the Omastar actually gets used. On the other end, I don't know if he's actually planning to use it or if it is just a denial pick, but it's going to be Smeargle for Freeday, which is another spikes option if he wants it. And then he's going to take... Or did I? I'm sorry, guys. I did this wrong. I got to back it up. Okay, I skipped a pick. I was wondering. I'm sorry, guys. I messed this up. The Wheezing Omastar actually got picked by Freeday. My bad. I misread. I missed the line somehow. But, okay, so George actually took... No wonder I missed this line. What the fuck are these picks? He took Hitmonlee Gorbis? I think it's the first time either of those mons have been picked. No wonder I skipped over that line. I mean, I guess Hitmonlee, if you want a fighter, since multiple fighting weaknesses, the Steelix, the Regice, the Regirock have been added, I guess he's the best one left. I don't know about Hitmonlee, and then I know even less about Gorbis. Why? Why? What's the merit? Yeah, no wonder I missed those. Hitmonlee Gorbis. Head scratcher for me. The Wheezing Omastar actually got picked by Freeday. Okay. Wheezing good against Lax and then protecting all his fighters. Omastar, not sure. Might just be denying his opponent a spiker. But I don't think the Omastar is good. I think it's better into George than it was against Freeday. But I still don't think it's good. Bunch of electrics on the other side. Bunch of things that have Earthquake. Couple of fighters. Don't think he's actually going to use the Omastar. The actual picks that George went with, he's the one who took Smeargle here. And then also Ursaring as a last pick. Smeargle does give him a spiker. This is his actual second spiker since Omastar's not there. The Smeargle, unlike the Omastar, I think might actually make a team. And then Ursaring, I guess, is just going to be another status absorber since he really doesn't have Bell. He just has the one dude in Miltank. And I guess technically Smeargle can have Heal Bell, but like it won't. It's awful at it. So I guess this is another way to deal with status. He does have a couple of Gutsmons in Ursaring and Hariyama. And then the final pick of the draft is Tauros for Freeday, which has seen a fair amount of love in the tour. I don't know that Intimidate blows me away against AustrianGeorge. He's got like some physical stuff, but not a ton. Intimidate is just always generally good to have as far as switching into CB normal. We've got Skarm, Registeel, and Scizor. Is that it? Just 3 normal resists? Yeah, that might actually be reasonably good in this case. 3 normal resists is okay. If you're assuming that those are being spread across different teams, only one of them in any given game, meh. Yeah, I mean, Tauros could, against like Registeel, could just click Earthquake, and you can randomly get Paras, or you could pressure those mons in other ways. I can see the Tauros potentially actually making a team and potentially being good. I certainly think it has a better chance of being played than the Omastar, but ultimately 3 of these pokes each are going to get cut, so maybe the Tauros and the Omastar are both on the bench. That is TBD. But yeah, my little mishap there that I apologize for aside, that is our draft. I felt from midway or so onward that Freeday was winning, and nothing really happened at the end to change my mind. I think Regice, Regirock, Wheezing are all insane value for how late they went. I think the Steelix is something that George should not have allowed him to have. I think that Freeday got the better end of the Spikes War, and I think Freeday does not have garbage like Gorbis, Hitmonlee, I don't know that like Ursaring is garbage, but I don't think it's good. The bottom end for George is eh. What I do think George has going for him, I think that Freeday never quite answered that Alakazam. I think the double pursuit banner, while it does have merit and while I can see why he did that, may come back to bite Freeday because, like I said, he never did end up taking the Chansey or whatever counter might have been left for the Zam. I think the Zam might actually give him a really hard time and potentially could win a game for George. I also think that, again, as I've been saying the whole time, not that Freeday's teams are at all like super slow or super stally. I think he's like mid-rangey and reasonably aggressive himself, but George has nothing even close to a stall team here. He could build like some like weird Scarm defensive Zap Doug Trio. He could try. He could build a janky stall team, but for the most part, I think George's teams are all going to be pretty aggressive, and aggression just wins sometimes. The Zam, I think in particular, especially with the questionable Umbreon Houndoom ban rather than taking one of those when you already knew that your opponent had the Zam, the Alakazam could be an issue for Freeday, and I think that's one of the big saving graces for George. I didn't love the pick at the time because these things were still floating out there, and I thought Freeday might take one, but as it played out, I think the Alakazam might end up actually being good. But other than that, I think that Freeday handled the Lax pretty well, and the Lax is probably not going to win a game for George. I think between the Doll and the Steelix, and a couple other picks, but the Doll and the Steelix are huge. The Celebi helps. I think the Electrics are reasonably well neutralized, but again, Freeday having not ever taken like the Chansey, for example, could potentially be vulnerable to these Electrics. If something bad happens to the Steelix or the Doll, crit, status, whatever, then maybe the Electrics go nuts. I think the lack of proper special walls for Freeday is going to be the best chance that George has. I do favor Freeday in this draft, but I do think that he only really has like the Regice. Like I said, I really think he should have, instead of like Omastar, picked up Chansey, for example. But I do think that he does potentially have matchups where he's vulnerable to the special side of things. Jinx, for example, could go nuts if it's like not against the Aerodactyl. So George definitely has a shot. The special attackers are going to be golden, and maybe that was the logic behind the Gorbis, which I'm still a little iffy about. But overall, if I have to pick a winner, I'm going to pick Freeday, but I definitely think George would not need a miracle to win, and I can see paths if the matchups cooperate where George can get there and the special attackers are just going to be too much for Freeday to deal with. And those are my thoughts. So if you guys have anything to say, and I hope you do, let me know in the comments who you guys think won this draft. I'd love to hear all your feedback as always. Please do consider hitting the like button. Please consider joining my Discord server, link in the description. Please consider subscribing to my channel. And that's it. There is one more quarterfinal draft that, as of the time of this recording, has not finished. But you know that when it does, I will bring it here, and you guys can tell me what you think of that draft too. But that's it for the night. Appreciate you watching. I will see you in the next video.